way for us, the youth, middle school and teen and high school kids, to advocate about historic preservation and learn about their national parks and learn ways to help them and get our voices heard.
Youth Summit is life-changing.
Youth Summit preserves history.
It's a really cool experience because you get to learn about stuff that you might not know. Like before, I've been to White Rocks area, but I didn't realize the sacredness, so I think it's really cool for me.
Youth Summit rocks!
Woo! Thank you so much for being here and applying and being willing and committed and interested in spending the next few days with us. You are the select few that have been selected to come to gain a great leadership experience and to also learn about some of the issues facing our historic places and public lands. And these are your properties. They are your public lands. We want to hear your ideas because you're the future for how these places are going to be managed and saved and loved.
The first thing I would challenge you all is to be engaged in this place. I'd like you to really feel this place. I want you to think about the sights, the colors, the textures, the feel of this place, the sand underneath your feet.
We're trying to keep this place so that you guys and your kids and your grandkids can come have an experience like your grandparents and your great-grandparents. So there's this piece of stewardship while you're here. What do you think it takes to get through all of these constantly changing things? What type of mindset? Resiliency, you nailed that one on the head. So that is the other theme for this summit, right? You have to be really resilient, which means that you're adaptable to change.
The trail that we're taking is called the Alcove Nature Trail. We are gonna go 1/4 mile out and 1/4 mile back. This is our only trail that is more or less accessible to somebody in a wheelchair. So I want you to look at it from the standpoint of somebody that might have special needs as far as maybe not being able to walk as well, or maybe not being able to participate in activities as fully as probably it looks like all of you. The second thing we're going to do on this trail is we're going to try to find that connection between nature and human resilience. The native people used most of this landscape in some way or another. Whether it was the bark from the trees or the berries or the seeds in the cones, the grasses, the fact that the animals eat the grasses and they ate the animals, you know, there's just a lot about this that was home for them, and so it created that ability to live here.
So this is an example of one of the inlet masonry structures that make up part of the 23-mile-long Rimrock Drive. And you can see these stones were hand-shaped with hammers and chisels, and they really were innovative in reusing a lot of the material that they were using to build the trail, or the road.
You guys heard a lot today about how Colorado National Monument is a special sacred place for the Ute tribes and the traditionally associated peoples. That is its own heritage that is valuable to us. There's also cultural landscapes. When you look at everything that's captured into a place, the plants, the geology, as well as the built environment, and all together it creates a special place. And we're gonna look at how cultural managers are dealing with climate change. And I'm gonna let you in on a secret. This is still developing. This is something that we are literally figuring out on the fly as we go. because very few people were trained for climate change archaeology, much less climate change cultural resource management. It's big, it's hard, it's scary. So what we're going to do first is throw you into coming up with some solutions.
Vulnerabilities we saw were like invasive species, erosion, extreme precipitation, and drought.
With our curve boat, we decided that since the buildings are getting old, they need restoration. In turn, that help protect them from the cold weather and the flooding. We need to transport the valuables, have evacuation plans in set, have basic facilities, heating, barriers, and such things.
Our adaptations are to evacuate the northern islands, and then on most of the other islands, document history, construct floodgates so to reduce the impact of flooding.
So the big thing to take away from this is that climate change is a threat multiplier. It takes whatever the existing weaknesses are, and like any disaster or any major system change, it makes it worse.
This was a fluid landscape. There was no park boundary, right? There was no Colorado National Monument. And so when we're talking about an archaeological site, we're not talking about when we go up to White Rocks, just all the scatter of tools that are left over and petroglyphs that are on the wall. All of this is an archaeological site, from the use of the plants for healing and medicines, to the use of the rocks for tools, for grinding grain and things like that. So when you think of an archaeological site, don't think of it as just a collection of rocks and tools and signs of people that have lived here in the past, because all of this is part of it.
We don't mind when people come enjoy these spaces. That's part of what our mission is as the National Park Service. Where we run into problems is when people don't know how to behave in these landscapes and they damage or deface them. So this area that you're standing in right now is the entrance to the designated archaeological site. So imagine that somebody came into, you know, the house you grew up in and took things that were incredibly sacred to you that maybe you'd had for generations. Would that feel like a violation? It absolutely would, right? So the fact that we had so many people in this country and in this area out here in the West, right, that were going into these sites, digging, removing things, and then profiting off of them is something that outraged a lot of people. So the positive effect of all of that is we put protections in place so that we could penalize the people that were doing these kinds of things. This is an area that we wanted to bring you to specifically because it shows how challenging this can be for us. Right? We could circle this whole area with law enforcement park rangers, right, and probably protect it. But A, that wouldn't be in keeping with this natural landscape. And B, then we wouldn't have law enforcement rangers to do all of the other stuff that we have to do in the park, right? These are the anthropomorphs that Nathan was talking about earlier. There's several right on this wall here. You see this one here too?
Maybe it's a kid.
I want you to think about ways that we can better educate and communicate with your peers about how to be respectful on these lands and what not to do.
Since people like to hang out here, maybe in a less harmful area to the environment or something, you could like have a picnic table so then they'll all eat there and not inside the rocks and try and create vandalism.
That's a good idea, so create an alternate space.
Some sort of like bigger sign that was like, please don't write on the rocks. It's very important, and if it like explained like the meaning of them so that people would actually understand.
You guys can be the solution to this. Right? And that is really exciting and encouraging for me because I want you all and your peers to come to public lands, to enjoy these spaces, to be part of this. right? And we just have to work together to make sure that everybody is treating them respectfully and being responsible.
That's the first thing I want you guys to start thinking about as we move down this trail, is I want you to think about all the different types of things in our nation that get preserved, right? From a national park to a memorial to a birthplace, maybe a battlefield, a historic home, to a trail. This is a trail that we're going to be walking on, but it's also a place that's significant to our nation's story. And so these switchbacks were designed for a vehicles of the past, right? Not our modern day vehicles, but vehicles that were much smaller. And yes, it could accommodate two-way traffic during points where people would probably have to, stop and backtrack and back up to get out of each other's way. But can you imagine 2 vehicles on this road in today's world? Yeah, that would be tough. When engineers heard that people wanted to put a road that followed the rim of the canyons, they're like, well, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. The whole point of that place is everything washes away in erodes. And so they had to use a lot of innovative design and a lot of culverts to keep the road in place. Down there, that's Rimrock Drive. This is the road we came up on in the bus to get up to the top of Serpents Trail. So before this road ever existed, this was the only way to get into the park. All members of the Ute tribes and the Ute bands would say that this is a sacred area, and so I think moving through this space, keeping that in mind is part of respecting that and visiting with respect. And certainly, when the park goes into any sort of construction or building of anything, or any sort of we call it ground disturbance, they have to consult and work hand in hand with the associated tribes.
We have primarily sandstone rock here. And we have 235 plus stone structures in this park that we maintain. This and this to shape a 2,000-pound rock, because that's all they have for pennies. And they slept out here and lived up here, so they slept in the dirt and they ate in the dirt, and they didn't, they were away from their homes. They didn't get paid much, and what they did get paid had to go back home. So these guys were tough, and what they did is very, very important to the story of this park and just the story of this country in general.
Preservation is environmentalism.
Architecture. Caring. Collaboration. Community. Alive. Reinvention. Safekeep.
Protection.
Sanctuary. Beautiful. Progression.
Safeguarding.
Storytelling.
Preservation is rad.
Preservation is placemaking.
Legacy.
Balance.
Resilience is
strength in others.
Strength when challenged.
Meeting challenges.
Stories lasting lifetimes.
An invigorating experience.
This bridge here was built in 1907. It was started in 1906, actually with a $3,000 grant from CDOT.
This bridge here, the Fruita Bridge, was nominated and listed back in 2002 on Colorado's Endangered Places list.
It's important for you guys at this age to understand that bridges can be historic, highways can be historic. There's lots of things besides buildings that can be historic and can be important to history.
So how could it be reused in a way that could benefit the public and the community and still preserve the essential historic character and features of the bridge?
The first one would be creating a trail, like a public access trail for people to be able to visit the bridge.
Having it being a campsite, a picnic site, brings people in an attraction.
so it has more people coming onto the bridge, seeing what's about, bringing back the history, and hopefully support money-wise to have people come.
To do whatever we can to make the bridge walkable again, but then put across it places to read about the history of the bridge.
Reach out to especially high schools and stuff, because a lot of kids that's our age, middle school, high school kids, don't have a lot of opportunity to use their voices. So if you kind of give them that opportunity and you guys reach out to the schools, maybe give a presentation in the schools about the bridge and about the problems you're having with it.
Fruita Bridge rocks! Rimrock rocks!
And every now and then in your life, there'll be an opportunity for you to step up to the plate and maybe save another bridge or another historic structure. And that's when you need to step up to the plate and do it. Because had I waited another 6 months, this bridge wouldn't have been here.
Save Fruita Bridge! Woo!
We give information to our visitors, and we want the visitors that come to Colorado National Monument to have a really positive experience, so they will learn to care about their national parks, their public lands, and be good stewards and be a good representative of the national parks when they go home. I want you to think from our hike, from what I told you about the plants and the natives that lived here, examples of resilience. And when tomorrow, at one of your sessions, they're going to ask you for examples of resilience that were demonstrated on the Canyon Rim hike.
You've all heard of Jurassic Park, right? Well, this is like the real Jurassic Park. This is not the Hollywood version. 150 million-ish years ago, in this Morrison Formation, all of these critters, small critters up to giant critters, died. So this area since the 1880s has been known for fossils. Trying to figure out how we can message and break that multi-generational, let's go out to the desert and dig up some bones and take them home with us. That's something that I'd love your ideas on. The other thing that unfortunately happens out here is vandalism. How do we change that behavior?
There's a little dinosaur, like a chicken-sized little dinosaur, and it's named Fruitafossor or Fruitidens because it came from Fruita, Colorado here, and it's a pretty cool looking little dinosaur. Just showing this is one of the places out here where you can see a dinosaur bone in sight, in situ, a cast of a dinosaur leg bone. You guys see it down here?
We hiked up to a cabin and we learned about the history of the cabin and how there were ranchers that lived there. There were Indians that lived in this territory and used this territory to hunt both megafauna and smaller animals. And we got to see the progression of history in just a single cabin.
And John Skinner's name appeared as one of his stone workers. So that's why we think that maybe that he's the one that built this, kind of when we put it all together, that it's been called Skinner Cabin for a long time. John Skinner did kind of have a history, at least somewhat, with building, stone buildings. So that's kind of what we think.
Coming to places like this, reminding myself that there are people other than me living in these places and living their lives and developing themselves. I think it's super cool to see that embodied in a single building.
Snook's Bottom actually became a gravel pit, but it was originally owned by Mr. Snook, starting back in the late 1800s. In the year 2000, this property, just over 100 acres, was zoned for residential development. This is before the city of Fruita owned it.
In 2003, we applied for a grant through Great Outdoors Colorado to acquire this property. It's just a really great conservation area, and we're very proud to be partners with Colorado Westland.
I want you to think about what is the public benefit? What were the multiple public benefits that motivated the city of Fruita, the Colorado West Land Trust, Great Outdoors Colorado to conserve it? These are called conservation values. What you're going to come up with.
The Colorado River is really close by, and if they would have built those houses, a lot of people wouldn't have access to it, and it's also an endangered water program. It's also a really good recreational area for like running and fishing and like paddleboarding and stuff like that.
And we think it's important for the bird habitat. Over there we saw barely any birds, and we hear more chirps and more resiliency within the birds and wildlife here. So I believe having protection and just not destroying this place gives opportunity for the wildlife to have its own peaceful balance.
There is some unique vegetation and resources that we'll find in a place like this. Just kind of the amalgamation of, the trees, the river, the birds, any kind of animals that are around here, the wildlife.
The more we collaborate, the more we partner, the less differences we have and the greater outcomes we can have across the landscape.
We have talked a lot about different kinds of changes and resiliency to those changes. And we've talked about political and social and natural changes. And so for this exercise, I want to bring our brains into focusing on natural climate change, because that is the area we're going to be working within for this exercise.
But what kind of material was it? Does anybody remember for sure?
It was
there on the cross that? And then,
I feel like so wrong. How do you think? Yeah, I agree. All right.
And like if there was if there was flooding, it would probably destroy the
irrigation. No, 1, 0, 1. 1.
It probably has already experienced rapid temperature change, but it's also been renovated by the people there, right?
That is zero.
Okay.
Erosion? You can't stop erosion.
Fire is an obvious one, I feel like, for a lot of them because of how dry it's been lately and the droughts, and clearly it can be very vulnerable because of the grass.
Everybody's ideas and creativity is going to challenge us and help us protect these places, and this is a really good example of that.
We're going to talk about interpretation. There's always somebody in behind it who's deciding which facts are going to go on to something, how that wording is going to look on the panel, which pictures they're going to use in the interpretive panel.
I feel like they should have one sign that's like history and then one sign recreation.
I think that this is honestly kind of good because it's called a welcome center.
You're being welcome to Colorado. You want to know the area.
All of the visual interpretation all around you. And what do you see? And more importantly, the question is, if you were coming here from another state or another country, what impression of Fruita would you get from looking all around you?
And it's also got the really Western theme, doesn't it?
Yeah. Some of the signs, they say Indians, which just slightly bothers me because both of my brothers are Native Americans. So it's
I think that they need to be simplified because it's they have a lot of images, they have images behind other images, and some of the font choices of overlaying it, it looks a little distracting, they're putting on too much. I think it just needs to be simplified.
The only thing that stuck out to me was the Robin Hood of the West. If this is supposed to be a monument just here for it, maybe if someone wants to shorten it down, keep it as a title instead of Butch Cassidy and have his name underneath, because I feel that'll pull lots of kids in with Robin Hood's part. There needs to be more diversity in the perspective, so there's nothing on natives, because we noticed that a lot of it was masculine. We talked about native voices, but we haven't really talked about so much of it is focused on men and masculinity, and there isn't kind of that woman's group.
And we also want to make them a little more accessible to all different kinds of tourists, whether it means incorporating QR codes, and as some other groups mentioned, other visual aids.
We're really looking forward to how to bring
the signage and interpretation tools more into relevancy of your generation. When this school was replaced by a newer school, this building was derelict. So they had to come up with a purpose. They made sure to get it documented. They got some state historic fund money, and they sensitively rehabilitated it so that it would be used as now this civic center in City Hall. So it's really the perfect solution. Everybody loves it. It's the anger of the community. So it's a great historic preservation story.
We love historic places!
This was a very special summit because we focused on stewardship and resiliency.
One of the main things I was very inspired about was seeing everyone working together.
The Colorado National Monument is an example of why we should be preserving this stuff.
The best way to do this would be to share personal stories of the park.
Resiliency is an ability to recover from or adjust easily to adversity, misfortune, or change. When I hear this definition, I think of differently abled or differently bodied people. Differently abled people should have the ability and access to seeing nature and seeing the national parks just like everyone else does.
This is a little crazy, but you would want a chalkboard because people like to say like so-and-so was here. And so they wouldn't have to put it on the rocks, they could put it on a chalkboard.
And I also wanted to talk about like personal awareness and the importance of connecting climate change and preservation, because personally I didn't even connect the two until Miss Geneva mentioned it.
I came to the conclusion that some of the two most important factors that we need to consider in actually preserving these areas is having community involvement and volunteers.
Technology is the future in preservation, which might not sound great because a lot of these places don't last forever. As much as we love the white rocks, eventually they'll completely erode away. And I think technology is a great way to preserve them forever, and we can always visit them later.
Hypothetically, if maybe Fruta had a culture night within one of the areas it was provided, I do know I really wish this was within my school or education, where there's a culture night or culture week where people from different cultures or had that ancestral background can bring in information.
Connecting to historic places and working to save them and their surroundings matters to me because I want to be able to see and experience other different historical places too.
I think a particularly effective way to do this would be through an educational YouTube channel. They're already a really common format that students and former students would be very familiar with.
Possibly having history fairs, which are kind of like science fairs, with students having their own science projects, but instead they're about some of these historic places.
More diverse topics will bring in a more diverse audience because it creates that personal connection to the sites. I believe that youth should have our own stage light. As we grow up and get older, we realize how the world is changing for both better and worse, and I believe greatly that we should have the light on us. With things like that said, I feel like what we're doing right now is a great opportunity for us to amplify our own voices.
Thank you guys.